what would you prefer defensive coordinator wise? What kind of resume would you like to have? Because you could have the up and comer from a smaller school. You could have a position coach from a bigger school. What's y'all's philosophy?
Can I start by giving you some grief?
I mean, by all means, Ira. It wouldn't be a Seminole Headlines if you didn't give me grief about one of the million things I say.
I wanted to know where the pivot became, because you have the column that we ran on the website a couple of days ago, or maybe yesterday, just saying that you want to see somebody with some big chops from a big name schools. You're in line with Peter Boulware. Peter Boulware tweeted over the weekend he doesn't want to see an up and comer. He wants somebody with some chops. But I could have swore on Wake Up Warchant, the fast rising Wake Up Warchant, that you were pimping the Cade Bell guy who was like at Western Carolina a year ago.
Oh no, that was
when did this switch go from the young up and comer scores a lot of points somewhere, we don't care where, to now you want these veteran coaches.
He is at an ACC school, but also that was before what I saw his goal line offense against Clemson. And then I'm like, no, that's a hard pass. It really, honestly, it was watching I said it on Wake Up. It was watching the Georgia-Tennessee game. And just that amount of talent, that amount of athleticism, the high level of play. It's like there's no reason Florida State shouldn't have guys that look like that and play like that on both sides of the ball. And I just want guys that have been around those types of dudes more. That's where I was already starting that pivot. But watching that game, being like, okay, no offense to my man, I like talking to him for the last half decade. Is Adam Fuller reeling in those kind of guys from the high school level? Is he? Was he? Did he ever? And do you need somebody that's been around him more?
That's not a new thing. That's not a new.
I know.
I mean, listen. Let me ask you a question: how you're defining it? Because do you think? Okay, Santucci at Georgia Tech is an up-and-coming guy who's been at Texas A&M. Obviously, he's had success. He's somebody that I like a lot, but I don't know if he falls under that umbrella.
It's funny, though. Like, every single guy, you look at their resume, and you can see it one of two different ways.
Yeah.
Santucci's a great example in the sense that, man, he's been at Texas A&M. I think he was at Notre Dame briefly.
He was at Notre Dame. He was at Duke.
But it was all with Elko. Like, he was Elko's sidekick for most of his career. Now he is calling the shots. But when he was Duke's DC the last few years, you didn't know, is that really him or is that Elko? This year, now at Georgia Tech, he actually, is calling the defense. Right. And they've had some really good moments. I thought they looked pretty good against Florida State. Although it turns out they gave up a season high 21.
I was say, I don't know. I don't know if I'd cite that one.
Yeah. They got embarrassed.
At the time, we felt like it was a pretty good plan. In hindsight, what were you doing, Tyler?
Yeah.
But to your point, otherwise, I mean, he's a young guy that's been around some big programs. Obviously, being at Texas A&M for years, the way they were recruiting at Texas A&M, he's been around, recruiting big time players. I think that would be, to me, there is a topic of conversation there about not just being able to recruit players at that level, but being able to coach the elite players, and you
got to get them.
This staff did it when, Jared Verse was an elite player. Braden Fisk was an elite player, but they weren't necessarily elite their whole lives in terms of how people viewed them.
Certainly not.
And treated them.
That's how they ended up at Albany and Western Michigan.
So then, that's another part of it, is relating to those guys. And so there's a lot of different layers to it.
I think it's a very difficult and nuanced discussion every time. I can see your point, Corey, and you'd want the biggest names in the business that would cause kids to turn heads and think maybe that Florida State's about to switch back to what they once were. They've got some of the biggest names in the business. Other times you look around the country and you see somebody having great success and you start down that path and wonder where the hell that guy come from. And it turns out for 9 years, nobody had ever heard of him. He had just been slowly matriculating his way up the ladder. Like, to me, on the one hand, do we all agree that Elko's a really good defensive coach?
Yes.
Okay, I think we all do, right? Well, he's had that guy with him two different stops. Why would he do it?
And took him with him.
Took him with him. Like, he wouldn't think he's a dumbass, right? So it's not about the acumen. I don't think we think that these guys are all stupid. It is a nice balance between understanding, teaching, but also recruiting. You've got to be able to get players, and clearly Mike's staff failed in the high school ranks to consistently get the best players that Florida State should bring in.
Yeah, and I think with the coordinator position, I don't know how much they have to be great recruiters, however you envision that to be, whatever you deem that to be. they have to have a track record, man, of not only putting up big numbers, but working with big-time talent, in my opinion, when you come to Florida State. And I think Mike Norvell, if we look in hindsight 5 years later about this coaching staff that he put together, and again, I grant you, and I said this in the column, I wrote it in the column, I grant you I wasn't writing this a year ago when they were undefeated. Thought it was a great staff. But in hindsight, it wasn't a staff that apparently could sustain any level of great success. I mean, they just put together the worst team in our lifetimes at Florida State. So
I don't think you thought it was a great staff.
I was about to say, when were we arguing that it was a great staff?
It was a staff that produced a 13-0 football team. So it wasn't obvious, a detriment to the program. But when you look at who he brought in, a guy from Charlotte, guy from Memphis, his QB coach was the tight ends coach of Memphis. Guys from TCU and on Maryland, like not horrible programs necessarily, but not big time stuff. And I just think that it's not like they have to get a big name defensive coordinator. I don't think they're going to go get the Notre Dame OC or the Notre Dame DC, which I guess is Freeman. But go get somebody that's been in those programs. Because look at this staff as it's currently constructed. Other than Randy Shannon and Odell Higgins, who went to those schools, how many of these guys have been around championship level, high caliber football and football players? They get a bunch of guys to the league.
I also think, and Corey, I hear you. I think you also wrote in your column. So I read it.
Nice.
You said, let's get, at the end of the day, the best coordinator available, right? Whoever the best is. Yeah, that's the hard part, to find that one. Because how many times have the three of us watched a guy, to Ira's point, have huge success somewhere and fail somewhere else miserably, or vice versa? Go somewhere, become a guy that was given a lot of responsibility, fail miserably, fall out of the limelight because of those failures, only to show back up 8 years later. One day you're watching a game and you're like, oh, well, that's where so-and-so is. And look at him kicking ass. It's bizarre because this is the industry. I do think it starts with Mike and figuring out where he went wrong, and Mike figuring out where Mike went wrong. You're going to have to obviously revamp this staff. He's in the process of doing it, and we'll see how many big names or middle of the road names or group of five or power two, however you want to look at it, coaches he's able to bring in. But he's got to figure out how it is the disconnect happened with him and that team and this program, because 1-9 is never acceptable, even in this weird era of college football. And I assume he's doing that. None of us are going to know, no matter who he hires, whether or not this is going to be successful for 2 more years. I mean, at least like maybe next year. Maybe next year we see a huge flip to the tune of, I don't know what we'll call a success next year. When you go 2-10, I suppose anything over 500 would feel like a pretty big success. But I really don't know how we're going to judge this, other than Mike has to figure out what went wrong for Mike's program, because this is a disaster. And it's so many places to start at, and we all have an opinion on it. I'm just willing to admit I have no idea, but I know that this is not normal to lose it to this extent. It's just not normal.
Agreed.
The focus to me, though, is, it's on players. At the end of the day, to me, because you can ask those questions about why did this coach work in this place or why did that work in that situation. A lot of times I think it's going to correlate to what kind of players they had. And I just think that, whether it's obviously it's going to have to be heavy through the portal, but it's also going to come from the high school ranks. But to me, it's about identifying those players, the best players you can getting them. And then I'm not, I'm not a huge development guy. I'm more about get players who can play and then put them in positions to succeed. I think development usually is the guys, the long shots, the guys you're bringing somebody in who you think has potential. Darion Williamson, Kentron Portier, those are developmental players. I'm talking about go get guys that can really play wherever they're at right now. To me, that's going to be the key. I mean, coaching, those guys get paid the most, man, but I think that's why, like Luke Fickell, can he not coach? Obviously he can coach. Their team stinks. He doesn't have the right players yet. There's just, you still look at how was Matt Rule successful at Baylor, but he hasn't been successful in Nebraska. It's just, there's so many things that go into it, but at the end of the day, if you've got better players, you're probably going to win more games. So that's where I think the focus needs to be. So to me, it's getting coaches who can get you players.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is that, and that's also, we can't just limit, and I know you weren't doing this, the development and the evaluation aspect of it too. Like, that's why I keep coming back to the guys that have been around it. And I brought this up on Wake Up Warchant. You remember when Jimbo got here, and he's like, the only guy on this offense that could have played for me at LSU was Preston Parker. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only football player they had. I just kind of want people that can get to this current program and this roster and go, yeah, no, he doesn't belong. He doesn't belong. He's going to be a badass. He doesn't belong. Like somebody that's been around elite football for a while that can evaluate what it's supposed to look like and know how to coach that kind of talent too. Bring it in and coach it.